I opened my mailbox on a Tuesday afternoon in late March, expecting the usual junk mail and maybe a credit card statement, but instead, I found a letter from the City of Phoenix Tax Assessment Office that made my blood run cold. The header read, "Commercial property. Tax assessment notice amount due, $18,742.50. My name is Zachary Xander, and I'm a 34-year-old software engineer who works remotely from my modest 3-bedroom house in a Phoenix, Arizona suburb called Desert Ridge Estates. I bought this place 2 years ago specifically because it was zoned residential, quiet, and perfect for my home office setup. The idea that I somehow owed nearly $19,000 in commercial property taxes was absolutely insane. I stood there on my front lawn, the Arizona sun beating down on my neck, reading and rereading the letter. According to the notice, my property at 4287 Saguaro Vista Drive had been registered as the primary business address for something called Premier Executive Consulting LLC since November of last year. That was 4 months ago. The letter stated that because a commercial entity was registered and operating from my address, my property had been reclassified from residential to mixed-use commercial, triggering a massive tax increase retroactive to the registration date. I had never heard of Premier Executive Consulting LLC in my entire life. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone and called the number on the letter. After navigating through an automated system that seemed designed to make people give up, I finally reached a human being named Patricia in the tax assessment office. Shell. "Yes, Mr. Xander, I'm looking at your file now," she said in a tired voice that suggested she'd been dealing with angry taxpayers all day. "The business registration shows Premier Executive Consulting LLC with your address as the primary location. The State Business Registry confirms this, and we received notification from the Arizona Corporation Commission in November." "But I don't own that company. I've never even heard of it," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Someone must have used my address by mistake." Patricia sighed. "Sir, we just process what the state sends us. If there's an error in the business registration, you'll need to take that up with the Corporation Commission and get the registration changed. Once you provide us with proof that the business is no longer at your address, we can reassess. But for now, the taxes are valid and due within 30 days. 30 days? For $18,000? Yes, sir. If payment isn't received or arrangements aren't made, a lien will be placed on your property." I ended the call and immediately went inside to start researching. Within 20 minutes of searching the Arizona Corporation Commission's business database, I found it. Premier Executive Consulting LLC had been registered on November 12th of last year. The registered agent was listed as someone named Bradford Mitchell, with my home address listed as both the principal office and mailing address. Bradford Mitchell. That name sounded familiar, but I couldn't immediately place it. I spent the next hour combing through my memory, and then it hit me. Bradford Mitchell was the president of our HOA. I'd only met him twice, once at the annual homeowners meeting last year, and once when he came by to personally deliver a violation notice because my trash cans had been visible from the street for more than 12 hours after pickup. He was a guy in his early 50s with slicked back gray hair and an expensive watch who always wore business casual clothes like he was about to close a real estate deal. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. Why would the HOA president register his business at my address? It had to be a mistake. Maybe he'd transposed numbers or something. I decided to call him directly. I pulled up the HOA directory and dialed Bradford's cell phone number. It rang 4 times before going to voicemail. His outgoing message was slick and professional. "You've reached Bradford Mitchell, president of Desert Ridge Estates HOA and principal of Premier Executive Consulting. Please leave a detailed message." There it was. Premier Executive Consulting. This was definitely his company. "Mr. Mitchell, this is Zachary Xander from 4287 Saguaro Vista Drive. I just received a commercial tax bill because apparently your business is registered at my home address. I need you to call me back immediately to fix this. My number is 602-555-0147. I hung up and waited and waited. Hours passed with no callback. By evening, I'd filed a complaint with the Arizona Corporation Commission explaining the situation and requesting an emergency change of address for the business registration. The website said these requests could take 4 to 6 weeks to process. That would be cutting it dangerously close to the 30-day tax deadline. The next morning, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I drove to Bradford's house, which was in the nicer part of our development where the lots were bigger and the homes had actual architectural character instead of the cookie-cutter designs in my section. His house was a sprawling ranch-style place with desert landscaping that probably cost more to maintain than my mortgage payment. I rang the doorbell and waited. A woman in her late 40s answered. She had shoulder-length blonde hair with highlights and was wearing workout clothes that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. "Can I help you?" she asked with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm looking for Bradford Mitchell. I'm Zachary Xander from the HOA. "Bradford's at work. What's this regarding?" "It's about his business registration. He accidentally used my home address and now I'm being hit with commercial property taxes. I need him to fix it immediately." Her expression shifted to something between confusion and annoyance. "That doesn't sound like something Bradford would do. Are you sure you have the right information?" "I'm positive. I have the registration documents from the state. Premier Executive Consulting, LLC. She crossed her arms. "Well, Bradford handles his own business affairs. I'll let him know you stopped by, but you really should go through proper channels rather than showing up at our home. I've called and left messages. This is urgent. I'm being charged $18,000 in taxes." "I'll give him the message," she said, and closed the door in my face. I stood there for a moment, stunned by the dismissal, then walked back to my car. As I was pulling away, I noticed Bradford's silver Lexus parked in the driveway. So much for being at work. Over the next few days, I became increasingly frantic. Bradford never returned my calls. The HOA management company said they couldn't help with personal business matters between residents. The Arizona Corporation Commission said my complaint was in the queue but couldn't guarantee when it would be processed. And the city tax office sent me a follow-up letter reminding me that the clock was ticking on my payment deadline. I consulted with a real estate attorney named Susan Greenberg, who I found through a friend's recommendation. She listened to my situation over the phone and gave me the bad news. The problem is that until the business registration is officially changed, the tax assessment is technically legitimate, she explained. The city is just enforcing what the state records show. You need to get that registration changed as your top priority. In the meantime, I'd recommend filing a police report for identity fraud. Identity fraud? Someone used your address without your permission for a legal business registration. That could constitute fraud, especially if it was done knowingly and causes you financial harm. Having a police report on file will help if this escalates. I took her advice and went to the Phoenix Police Department's North Precinct that afternoon. The officer who took my report, a tired-looking guy named Officer Hernandez, seemed skeptical at first. "So your HOA president used your address to register his business?" he asked, typing slowly on his computer. "Yes, and now I'm being charged commercial property taxes because of it." "Have you asked him why?" "He won't return my calls or answer his door when I know he's home." Officer Hernandez nodded slowly. "Okay, I'll file this as a possible fraud case, but unless there's evidence of intentional harm or identity theft, there's not much we can do from a criminal perspective. This might be more of a civil matter." "So you're not going to investigate?" "We'll document it. If you get more evidence that this was intentional or part of a larger scheme, bring it to us and we can reassess. But right now, it could just be an honest mistake." I left the police station feeling defeated. An honest mistake that was costing me $18,000 and threatening my home with a tax lien. That weekend, I decided to attend the monthly HOA board meeting. These were open to all residents, though usually only about 10 people showed up, mostly retirees who had nothing better to do. The meetings were held in the community clubhouse, a small building near the development's entrance that also housed a gym and a pool. When I walked in, Bradford Mitchell was already there, standing at the front of the room organizing papers on a podium. He looked up when I entered, and I swear I saw a flicker of recognition and discomfort cross his face before he replaced it with a professional smile. "Zachary, good to see you," he said smoothly. "Taking an interest in community governance?" We need to talk about your business registration, I said, walking toward him. His smile didn't waver, but his eyes went cold. This isn't the time or place for personal matters. We have an agenda to follow. You registered your company at my address, and now I'm being charged commercial taxes. That's not a personal matter, that's fraud. Several other residents had started filing in, and they were watching our exchange with interest. Bradford's jaw tightened. I don't know what you're talking about, but if you have a complaint, you can file it with the HOA management company through proper channels. Now please take a seat, we're about to start. I've been trying to reach you for days. Seat, now, his voice had gone hard, or I'll ask you to leave for disrupting HOA business. I was about to argue further when a woman in her 60s sitting in the front row turned around and spoke up. Let the man speak, Bradford. If there's fraud happening, we should all hear about it. Bradford's face flushed. Mrs. Chen, with all due respect, this is not an agenda item. We have HOA business to conduct. But Mrs. Chen wasn't backing down, and I recognized her as Linda Chen, one of the board members. Make it an agenda item. I move to add discussion of business registration issues to tonight's meeting. Another board member, a younger guy named Tom something, seconded the motion. Bradford looked like he wanted to argue, but instead forced a smile. Fine. We'll address it under new business at the end of the meeting. Zachary, please take a seat. The meeting dragged on for nearly an hour, covering the usual mundane topics: landscaping contracts, pool maintenance schedules, a proposal to repaint the community entrance sign. I sat there seething, watching Bradford run the meeting with practiced efficiency, all while knowing he was the reason I was about to lose $18,000. Finally, we reached new business. Bradford looked directly at me. Zachary has raised some concerns about a business registration. Zachary, you have 5 minutes. I stood up and explained the entire situation to the room of about 15 residents and 4 board members. How I'd received the commercial tax bill, how I'd discovered Bradford's company was registered at my address, how he'd refused to return my calls or fix the problem. When I finished, the room was silent. Linda Chen spoke first. Bradford, is this true? Is your consulting business registered at this young man's address? Bradford's expression was carefully neutral. There appears to have been an administrative error when my accountant filed the paperwork last year. I only learned about this issue a few days ago when Mr. Xander left a voicemail. I've been working with my accountant to correct it. That's a lie, I said. You haven't returned any of my calls or emails. I came to your house and your wife said you were home. I was handling it through proper business channels, Bradford said coolly. I don't appreciate being accused of lying in front of the board and community members. This was an honest mistake that is being corrected. Then why haven't I received any confirmation of that? Why hasn't the registration been changed? These things take time. The state bureaucracy doesn't move instantly. Linda Chen frowned. Bradford, how did this mistake even happen? How does an accountant accidentally use someone else's address? Bradford shrugged. Human error. Perhaps a number was transposed. I'll have an answer once I speak with my accountant in more detail. I pulled out my phone. The address is exactly right. 4287 Saguaro Vista Drive. That's my house. Not a transposed number, the exact address. Tom, the younger board member, leaned forward. Bradford, do you have documentation showing you filed to change the registration? I don't carry my business paperwork to HOA meetings, Tom. But you can provide it? Bradford's face was getting red again. I don't appreciate being interrogated over what is a simple administrative error. I'm the HOA president, not a criminal. Now, if there's no other new business, I move to adjourn. I second that we adjourn, said the 4th board member, a woman named Patricia, who I'd never seen speak before. The meeting ended with nothing resolved. As people filed out, Linda Chen approached me. I believe you, she said quietly. Bradford can be difficult. But something about this doesn't sit right. Do you have documentation of everything? I have the tax bill, the business registration, my complaint to the state, and a police report. Her eyebrows went up. Police report? My attorney advised me to file one for identity fraud. She nodded slowly. Good. Keep records of everything, and let me know if Bradford doesn't fix this within the week. I'm going to start asking some questions of my own. I thanked her and left, but I wasn't optimistic. Bradford clearly had no intention of fixing this quickly, if at all. The following Monday, things got worse, much worse. I received a certified letter from a law firm called Whitmore and Associates. Inside was a civil lawsuit filed by Premier Executive Consulting LLC against me for interference with business operations and defamation. The suit claimed that I had been harassing Bradford Mitchell, spreading false accusations about his business and causing reputational damage. It sought $25,000 in damages. I sat in my kitchen staring at the lawsuit papers, feeling like I was in a nightmare. Not only was I being charged $18,000 in commercial taxes, but now I was being sued for $25,000 for trying to fix the problem that Bradford had created. I immediately called Susan Greenberg, the attorney I'd consulted earlier. "This is a slap suit," she said after I read her the details. "Strategic lawsuit against public participation. He's trying to silence you and intimidate you into dropping the issue. The good news is Arizona has anti-slap laws. The bad news is you're going to need to defend yourself, which means legal fees." "I don't have money for legal fees. I'm trying to figure out how to pay an $18,000 tax bill." "Let me review the lawsuit paperwork. Can you email it to me? In the meantime, don't communicate with Bradford or his attorneys without legal representation." I spent the rest of the day in a fog. How had my life gone from normal to completely upside down in less than 2 weeks? That evening, I decided to do something I probably should have done earlier. I started digging into Bradford Mitchell's background. A few hours of internet searching revealed some interesting information. Bradford had been president of the Desert Ridge Estates HOA for 6 years. Before that, he had worked in commercial real estate, though I couldn't find much detail about his specific role. His LinkedIn profile listed him as executive business consultant for his current company, Premier Executive Consulting LLC, which supposedly provided strategic business advisory services to mid-market companies. But here's what was interesting. I found 3 other addresses listed in various business databases for Premier Executive Consulting. One was in Scottsdale, one in Tempe, and one in Gilbert. All residential addresses in what appeared to be HOA managed communities. I pulled up Google Street View for each address. They were all normal single-family homes, just like mine. Was Bradford registering his business at multiple residential addresses? Why would someone do that? I called Susan Greenberg back and told her what I'd found. That's very interesting," she said, "and potentially illegal depending on his intent. Let me make some calls. If he's doing this systematically, there might be other victims." 2 days later, Susan called me back with news. I contacted the homeowners at those other addresses. 2 of them had no idea Bradford's business was registered at their homes. The third knew because she'd also gotten hit with commercial property taxes last year. What happened to her? She paid the taxes. She couldn't afford to fight it, and Bradford threatened to fine her through the HOA for various violations if she made trouble. She's terrified of him. My stomach turned. So he's been doing this multiple times, but why? That's the question. I've been thinking about it, and I have a theory. I did some research into commercial property tax law. If you own a business with multiple locations, you can potentially claim deductions and write-offs for each location. He might be using these addresses to inflate his business footprint on paper for tax purposes or to qualify for certain business benefits. So he's committing tax fraud using our addresses. Possibly, but proving it would require access to his business tax returns and financial records. What we can prove is that he's registering his business at addresses without the homeowner's permission, which is identity fraud and possibly wire fraud if he's using it for financial benefit. What do we do? We need to get the IRS involved, and possibly the FBI if this crosses state lines or involves federal tax fraud. But first, let me file a response to his slap suit and a countersuit for fraud, identity theft, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Over the next week, things moved quickly. Susan filed our legal response and countersuit. I also reached out to the other homeowners who'd been victimized and convinced them to join in a joint complaint. But Bradford wasn't sitting idle either. 3 days after our countersuit was filed, I received a notice from the HOA that I was being fined $500 for landscaping violations and another $300 for exterior paint not conforming to approved color palette. Both claims were completely bogus. My landscaping was identical to everyone else's on my street, and my house was painted the exact beige color required by the HOA guidelines. I took photos documenting everything and sent them to Susan, who added harassment and retaliation to our countersuit. The situation escalated further when I received another notice from the city tax office. Because I hadn't paid the initial commercial property tax bill and the 30-day window had passed, a tax lien had been placed on my home. The amount due had also increased to include penalties and interest, $21,456.80. I was on the verge of a breakdown. My credit was going to be destroyed. I couldn't refinance or sell my house with a lien on it, and I definitely didn't have $21,000 sitting around. Susan advised me to file for an emergency stay of the lien while our lawsuit proceeded, which would temporarily prevent the city from taking collection action. But filing for the stay cost another $1,500 in legal fees that I didn't have. I ended up putting it on a credit card. Meanwhile, Linda Chen, the HOA board member who'd believed my story, started doing some investigating of her own. She called me one evening in mid-April with some disturbing news. "I've been going through the HOA financial records," she said. "Bradford has been president for 6 years, and he's also been the treasurer for most of that time. There are some serious irregularities in the books." "What kind of irregularities?" "Payments to vendors that don't seem to exist when I try to verify them. Large cash withdrawals for vague expenses. And here's the really interesting part. Premier Executive Consulting has been paid over $40,000 in the last 3 years for HOA management consulting services." "He's been paying his own company with HOA funds?" "It looks that way, and I don't remember the board ever voting to approve those payments. I'm bringing this to the next board meeting, and I'm also contacting a forensic accountant." "Linda, be careful. This guy is vicious. He's already suing me." "I know, but I've been on this board for 12 years, and I'm not going to let some corrupt HOA president ruin our community." The next HOA board meeting was scheduled for the first week of May. Word had gotten around the community about the conflicts between Bradford and me, and about Linda's investigation into the HOA finances. When I arrived at the clubhouse, there were at least 40 residents there, more than I'd ever seen at an HOA meeting. Bradford was already at the front of the room, but he looked different. Gone was the confident, slick demeanor. He looked stressed, with dark circles under his eyes and his usually neat hair slightly disheveled. The meeting started with the standard agenda items, but you could feel the tension in the room. Everyone was waiting for the fireworks. When they got to financial reports, Linda stood up. "I move to table all other business and address serious concerns about financial mismanagement and potential embezzlement from the HOA accounts." Bradford's face went white. "That's a serious accusation, Linda. Do you have evidence?" "I have documentation of over $40,000 in payments to your personal business from HOA funds without proper board approval. I have records of payments to vendors that appear not to exist, and I have testimony from multiple homeowners that you've been fraudulently registering your business at their addresses." The room erupted in conversation. Bradford banged his gavel, but people ignored him. "Order! I demand order!" he shouted. "These accusations are completely false and slanderous. Linda, you're out of line and overstepping your authority as a board member." "Then explain the payments," Linda said calmly. "Explain why Premier Executive Consulting received $40,000 from the HOA. Those were legitimate consulting fees for services rendered." "What services?" Bradford's mouth opened and closed. "Financial consulting, strategic planning, various administrative services." "Do you have contracts, invoices, any documentation of these services?" "I don't have to explain myself to you. The HOA president has discretion over administrative expenses." Tom, the younger board member, stood up. "Bradford, you know that's not true. Any expense over $500 requires board approval according to our bylaws." "Linda's right. If you authorize these payments to your own company without board approval, that's embezzlement." Several residents started shouting questions at Bradford. He looked around the room like a cornered animal. "This is a witch hunt," he yelled. "Zachary has been spreading lies about me because he's upset about a simple administrative error. Now he's turned Linda and others against me. I've devoted 6 years to this HOA, and this is the thanks I get?" I stood up. "You registered your business at my house and 3 other houses without permission. You're being charged commercial taxes because of your fraud. You sued me for $25,000 when I tried to fix the problem you created, and now we find out you've been stealing from the HOA. This isn't a witch hunt, Bradford. This is accountability." The room broke into applause. Bradford's face went from white to bright red. "I'm done with this circus," he said, gathering his papers. "I resign as HOA president effective immediately." He started walking toward the door, but Linda's voice stopped him. "Bradford, if you leave, I'm calling the police. We need a full accounting of these financial irregularities." "Call them then," he shouted. "I've done nothing wrong, and I'll prove it in court." He stormed out of the clubhouse. Linda looked at Tom and Patricia, the other board members. "Do we agree we should contact the police?" They both nodded. Linda pulled out her phone and called the Phoenix Police Department's non-emergency line. She explained that the HOA had discovered evidence of embezzlement by the former president and requested an officer to come take a report. The rest of us stayed at the clubhouse, people talking in small groups about what had just happened. I felt a strange mix of vindication and anxiety. Bradford had been exposed, but I still had a $21,000 tax lien on my house and was being sued for $25,000. 2 police officers arrived about 20 minutes later. Linda provided them with copies of the financial documents she'd compiled. I also spoke with them and provided details about the fraudulent business registrations and the tax issues. One of the officers, a woman named Officer Ramirez, took extensive notes and said they'd forward the information to the fraud division for investigation. "How long until something happens?" I asked. "Could be weeks or months depending on their caseload and how complex the investigation is. But based on what you're telling me, this sounds like it could be serious fraud." Over the next 2 weeks, the investigation unfolded rapidly. It turned out that once the police started digging, they found a lot more than even Linda had discovered. Bradford had been systematically embezzling from the HOA for years, using a network of fake vendor accounts and shell companies. The total amount stolen was over $150,000. He'd also been registering his consulting business at homeowners' addresses, not just to commit tax fraud, but to establish business presence in multiple cities to qualify for government contracts and business certifications he wasn't entitled to. The Arizona Attorney General's office got involved because Bradford's scheme had crossed multiple jurisdictions. They discovered he'd been doing similar things in 2 other HOAs where he'd served on boards, victimizing at least a dozen homeowners total. On May 15th, Bradford Mitchell was arrested at his home and charged with multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, identity theft, and tax evasion. The arrest made the local news, and I had the surreal experience of seeing footage of Bradford being led away in handcuffs from the same house where his wife had closed the door in my face weeks earlier. With Bradford facing criminal charges, his civil lawsuit against me quickly fell apart. His attorney withdrew from the case, and without anyone pursuing the suit, it was dismissed. Susan Greenberg helped me file a claim as a victim in the criminal case, which meant I might eventually recover some damages. The tax issue took longer to resolve, but with the criminal investigation underway and proof that Bradford had fraudulently registered his business at my address, the city agreed to remove the commercial classification from my property and vacate the tax lien. I still had to go through a formal appeals process that took several weeks, but by early June, my property was back to residential status and the liens were removed. The other homeowners who'd been victimized had similar results. The woman who'd already paid commercial property taxes the previous year was refunded her money with interest. Bradford's preliminary hearing was in late June. I attended along with several other victims. He'd lost weight and looked haggard in his orange jumpsuit. His attorney tried to argue for a plea deal, but the prosecution wasn't interested in going easy. The evidence was overwhelming. The case eventually went to trial in September. Bradford was convicted on 18 counts including fraud, embezzlement, identity theft, and tax evasion. The judge sentenced him to 6 years in federal prison and ordered him to pay restitution to all his victims, including the HOAs he'd stolen from and the homeowners whose addresses he'd fraudulently used. The Desert Ridge Estates HOA also filed a civil lawsuit against Bradford and was awarded a judgment for the full amount he'd embezzled plus damages. His house went into foreclosure, and the proceeds from the sale went toward paying his restitution obligations. I eventually received a check for $32,000, which covered my legal fees, the emergency stay filing, and compensation for the stress and damage to my credit. It didn't feel like a victory, so much as a relief that the nightmare was finally over. The HOA elected Linda Chen as the new president. One of her first actions was to implement new financial oversight policies, including regular audits by independent accountants and a requirement that no board member could have any financial interest in vendors hired by the HOA. Looking back on the whole ordeal, which lasted about 6 months from start to finish, I'm still amazed at how quickly things spiraled out of control. A simple act of fraud, registering a business at my address without permission, led to a massive criminal investigation that uncovered years of embezzlement and corruption. I learned some important lessons through the experience. First, document everything. The paper trail I created by filing complaints, taking photos, and keeping records was crucial to building the case against Bradford. Second, don't be intimidated by bullies, even when they try to use lawsuits and threats to silence you. Bradford's slap suit was designed to scare me into backing down, but standing firm eventually exposed his entire criminal enterprise. Third, there are good people out there who will help when they see something wrong. Linda Chen could have ignored the problems or decided it wasn't worth the trouble, but she chose to investigate and push for accountability. I also learned that HOA boards need oversight. Bradford was able to steal and defraud for years because he consolidated power, held multiple positions, and operated without proper checks and balances. The new policies Linda implemented should prevent similar corruption in the future, but they only work if residents stay engaged and pay attention. As for my daily life, things eventually returned to normal. I still work from my home office, still live in the same house in Desert Ridge Estates, and the HOA is actually pretty well run these days under Linda's leadership. My property taxes are back to normal residential rates. My credit recovered after the liens were removed. Sometimes I drive past Bradford's old house, which has new owners, now a young couple with a baby. They have no idea about the drama that unfolded there, or the corrupt HOA president who used to live in that house. It's probably better that way. The whole experience taught me to pay attention to the seemingly boring aspects of home ownership, like HOA meetings and property tax assessments. Those mundane details can have huge consequences if something goes wrong. It also taught me that fraud can happen anywhere, even in a quiet suburban neighborhood, and that the person committing the fraud might be someone in a position of trust and authority. I occasionally get contacted by news reporters or people from other HOAs who heard about the case and want advice about their own situations. I always tell them the same thing. If something seems wrong, investigate. Don't assume that people in authority positions are acting in good faith. Ask questions, demand documentation, and don't be afraid to escalate to law enforcement if you find evidence of fraud or corruption. The Bradford Mitchell case became something of a cautionary tale in Phoenix area HOAs. I've heard from people in other communities who said their HOA boards implemented new oversight policies after hearing about what happened in Desert Ridge Estates. If some good came from my nightmare experience, I suppose that's it. There were also some unexpected positive outcomes. I became friendly with Linda Chen and several other residents I'd met through the ordeal. We formed a kind of informal watchdog group that monitors HOA operations and finances to make sure everything stays above board. We meet quarterly just to review the books and attend board meetings regularly. It's actually been interesting to learn more about how HOAs function and to feel more connected to my community. Susan Greenberg, the attorney who represented me, became a friend as well. She told me the case was one of the most interesting she'd handled in years, and that it helped her establish a specialty in HOA fraud cases. She's since represented several other clients in similar situations and has become something of an expert on the topic. The media attention from Bradford's arrest and trial also led to some legislative interest. A state representative from Phoenix introduced a bill that would strengthen penalties for fraudulent business registrations and make it easier for victims to get relief from tax assessments caused by fraud. The bill passed in the following legislative session and was signed into law. It's now called the Homeowner Address Protection Act, and while it doesn't have my name on it, I know my case was part of the impetus for its creation. As for Premier Executive Consulting LLC, the business registration was finally, officially changed and then dissolved entirely as part of Bradford's plea agreement. The Arizona Corporation Commission also implemented new verification procedures for business registrations to prevent similar fraud in the future. Now, when someone registers a business at a residential address, the Commission sends a verification notice to the property owner to confirm they're aware of and approve the registration. I sometimes wonder what Bradford is doing now in federal prison. Did he think he'd never get caught? Was the money worth destroying his life, losing his house, and spending years behind bars? I'll never understand the mindset of someone who could systematically steal from their own neighbors and community members without apparent remorse. His wife divorced him during the trial. I saw her once at a grocery store about a year after his conviction. We made eye contact briefly, and I could see a mix of shame and anger in her expression before she quickly turned away. I felt a moment of sympathy for her. She'd lost her home and her marriage because of Bradford's crimes, and while I don't know if she was aware of what he was doing, I suspect she was as much a victim as the rest of us. The financial restitution from Bradford helped, but it didn't cover all my costs. I'd lost probably 100 hours of work time dealing with the crisis, had stress-induced health issues including insomnia and anxiety that required therapy, and had the intangible cost of feeling violated in my own home. You can't put a dollar figure on the feeling of security that gets shattered when someone fraudulently uses your address and turns your life upside down. But I also gained something from the experience. I learned I was capable of fighting back against a powerful, corrupt person and winning. I learned the justice system, while slow and imperfect, can work when you have evidence and persistence. I learned the value of community and the importance of people looking out for each other. Today, when I get my mail and see my property tax assessment showing residential rates, I feel a little surge of relief and gratitude. When I attend HOA meetings and see Linda running them with transparency and integrity, I'm reminded that good people can make a difference. And when I'm working from my home office, I sometimes think about that day in March when I opened my mailbox and found the commercial tax bill that started everything. It was the worst 6 months of my life in many ways. The stress, the fear, the financial pressure, the sense of injustice, all of it was overwhelming. There were days I thought about just paying the taxes and moving on, avoiding the fight. But I'm glad I didn't. Standing up to Bradford not only solved my own problem, but exposed a much larger pattern of fraud that had hurt many people and would have continued hurting more people if left unchecked. The experience changed my perspective on a lot of things. I used to think HOAs were just annoying bureaucracies that told you what color to paint your house and when to water your lawn. Now I understand they're mini-governments with real power over people's lives and property. And like any government, they need oversight, transparency, and engaged citizens to function properly. I also used to think fraud and corruption were things that happened in big corporations or government agencies, not in suburban neighborhoods. I learned that crime can happen anywhere, and sometimes the criminals are the people you least suspect: the successful businessman, the HOA president, the guy with the nice car and the expensive watch. Most importantly, I learned not to be passive when something is wrong. It would have been easier to ignore the problem or assume someone else would deal with it. But if I hadn't pushed, if I hadn't filed complaints and hired an attorney and stood up at that HOA meeting, Bradford might still be stealing and defrauding people today. I'm sharing this story because I want other people to know that if they find themselves in a similar situation, whether it's HOA corruption, fraud, or any other injustice, they can fight back. It won't be easy and it won't be quick, but it's possible to hold wrongdoers accountable even when they seem powerful and untouchable. Bradford Mitchell thought he was above consequences. He'd gotten away with his schemes for years, and he probably assumed he could intimidate or outlast anyone who challenged him. But he was wrong. One homeowner who refused to back down, combined with a diligent board member and a competent attorney, was enough to bring down his entire house of cards. I still live in Desert Ridge Estates, and I still love my house despite everything that happened. It's my home, and I wasn't going to let a corrupt HOA president take it from me through fraud and intimidation. The neighborhood is better now without Bradford's toxic influence, and I like to think my willingness to fight back contributed to that positive change. So that's my story about how my HOA president registered his business at my address, got me hit with commercial taxes, and then sued me when I tried to fix it. It's a cautionary tale about the importance of vigilance, the reality of corruption in unexpected places, and the power of persistence in the face of injustice. And ultimately, it's a story about justice prevailing, even when the odds seem stacked against it. If there's one message I want people to take away from this, it's this. Don't be a passive victim when someone wrongs you. Document everything, seek help from professionals and authorities, and don't back down even when the other person tries to intimidate you. The truth has a way of coming out if you're willing to fight for it, and sometimes one person standing up can make all the difference. My life is back to normal now, better even, because I'm more engaged with my community and more aware of the importance of oversight and accountability. The whole ordeal was terrible while I was going through it, but I emerged stronger, wiser, and more connected to the people around me. And Bradford Mitchell is in prison where he belongs, unable to hurt anyone else with his schemes and fraud. That's worth something. That's worth a lot, actually. Justice isn't always swift and it isn't always easy, but when it finally arrives, it feels pretty good. And knowing that my fight helped protect other people from becoming victims makes all the stress and difficulty worthwhile. I'd do it again if I had to, though I sincerely hope I never have to deal with anything like this again. Living in an HOA comes with certain trade-offs. You give up some autonomy in exchange for maintained common areas and supposedly protected property values. But that system only works when the people running it are honest and accountable. Bradford Mitchell abused his position of trust in the worst possible way, and it took a lot of people working together to stop him and repair the damage he caused. The Desert Ridge. Estate's HOA is stronger now because of what happened. We have better financial controls, more engaged residents, and leadership that understands the importance of transparency. It took a crisis to get there, but sometimes that's what it takes to create real positive change. As I sit here in my home office, looking out at my desert-landscaped yard with my trash cans properly stored out of sight and my house painted the approved shade of beige, I can laugh a little at the absurdity of it all. I almost lost my house because some corrupt HOA president wanted to commit tax fraud. But I didn't lose it. I fought back, and I won, and the bad guy went to prison. That's the end of my story, though Bradford Mitchell's story continues behind bars for several more years. For me, life goes on. I work, I pay my residential property taxes without complaint, I attend the occasional HOA meeting, and I enjoy my home. And every time I see Linda Chen around the neighborhood, we share a knowing nod, survivors of a bizarre ordeal that brought out both the worst and best in people. If you're ever in a situation where someone in authority is abusing their power, remember my story. You're not powerless. You have options. And sometimes standing up for yourself leads to exposing something much bigger that needed to be exposed. Don't let the corrupt people win through your silence or inaction. Fight back, document everything, get help, and keep pushing until justice is served. That's what I did. And I'm glad I did. My home is still my home, my taxes are what they should be, and the neighborhood is better off. And somewhere in federal prison, Bradford Mitchell has a lot of time to reflect on how his greed and fraud destroyed his life and hurt so many people. That's the real ending to this story: justice served, lessons learned, and life moving forward in a better direction.